You know, every once in a while, I do get bored with my normal content. Don't get me wrong, I love a good quick and easy breakfast video, but from time to time, I just need to make something more weird or challenging, such as trying to recreate foods and drinks from Bridgerton, the Netflix adaptation. If you haven't seen this show yet and you're planning to do so at some point, no worries, my video is going to be spoiler free. I'm not going to get into any major plot twists and secrets, I'm just here to talk about the food and minor details that won't really give anything away. I'm just so impressed by the set design of this series. I mean, these food stylists, they came and did their jobs. Food in film can have many different functions. Sometimes it's used as a plot device, to move the story forward in some way. Sometimes it's there to convey or emphasize a certain feeling, making you feel cozy and comforted, for example, or sad, thinking of the classic someone's crying into a bucket of ice cream scene. In Bridgerton, food is definitely mainly used as decoration, but also as a way of driving home the fact that these characters are living in abundance. Anytime we do see someone make food, it's usually staff members, while the main characters are unsure of how to warm up a glass of milk.
Well, go on.
For me?
I should not know how to do it.
You believe I should?
Tea is of course huge in the Bridgerton universe, both the afternoon tea type of meal and the drink, especially in episode 3 of season 2, where we get 2 scenes about tea, one after the other. This cup here I borrowed from a friend for this video. It matches the one in the show perfectly, and it comes with a lid and a little tea strainer. First, I'm adding some cardamom pods. I went to 5 different stores trying to find these. And then the only other spice Kate seems to be adding is whole cloves. Lastly, she's pouring over some black tea. Something my brain just didn't register. I was convinced this was water, and so I added my tea leaves straight to the spices and poured over hot water. It's a little 1-cup method, you could say. I've since tried Kate's version as well, and it tastes pretty much the same, although I did make my tea a bit too strong here. And so I would actually recommend letting the tea and the spices steep together over doing it in 2 steps. Now, since she's stirring in her milk with a spoon, I can only assume she's added some sugar just before that, so I did about 1 teaspoon of brown sugar and then poured in my oat milk. This was very cozy. Normally when making chai, I would add cinnamon or ginger, but both of these spices are quite overpowering, whereas the cardamom and cloves combo is much more subtle. I remember at some point in the show, Kate mentions her dislike for the way the English drink their tea, which is why it makes so much sense for her character here to put together more of a masala chai sort of drink. At least that's what I'm assuming this is. I'm not super well versed when it comes to Indian, authentic Indian tea. Let's jump back to season 1 for a moment.
Oh. Why, these are delicious. We must order some to try them.
Now, my small amount of research here made me think that these are Scottish-style hand pies that are, first of all, decorated beautifully and most likely filled with some sort of meat mixture. I am, however, using mushrooms because I feel like it's a very nice and hearty plant-based substitute. Plus, just before the pies are shown, there is a split second where we can see Simon holding a basket filled with what I believe has to be kale. And so mushroom and kale pies it is. To a small saucepan, add some water and some vegan butter and bring the heat up all the way to get the butter to melt as quickly as possible. You don't want it to be boiling though. Meanwhile, combine the dry ingredients: all-purpose flour, cornstarch, salt, and some other spices like black pepper and nutmeg. Create a well in the center and pour in the now fully melted butter-water mixture, and using a spatula mix everything up until roughly combined. Once it's not too hot to touch anymore, you can transfer this to your surface and knead the dough with your hands for a good 3 minutes or so. The dough felt a little sticky still, which is why I worked in another teaspoon of cornstarch. I know cornstarch is not an authentic Regency era type of ingredient, but it works really well when it comes to removing moisture. That went into the fridge for 1 to 2 hours. In the meantime, I got started on the filling. First off, I cut up a bunch of veggies. I know my top is ridiculous. It is the most Bridgerton-esque outfit that I could put together that day. It's giving very much Featherington Sisters, I agree. But anyway, I'm chopping up a bunch of mushrooms, an onion, and a bit of garlic. And then I let some vegan butter melt over medium and then sauteed the onion in there for about 5 minutes until translucent before adding all the mushrooms. It's a lot of mushrooms, but it's gonna cook down fairly quickly. Plus garlic. I gave both another 6 to 8 minutes. Since this is quite the fancy recipe, I'm also adding in some white wine. I allowed these mushrooms to cook for another 2 to 3 minutes, and meanwhile I was wrestling with this block of frozen kale. Maybe perhaps go for a different product, one where the frozen kale is already pre-portioned out. I had even let the kale defrost for like 30-45 minutes, didn't do anything. But anyway, some way somehow I managed to cut off about 200 grams of this kale. Mix that in until fully defrosted, and then I finished everything off with a splash of vegan cream and some more salt. If you're feeling especially fancy, you can also add some lemon zest. That tastes really nice in this. Alright, back to the crust. Take the dough out of the fridge and knead it for another minute on a floured surface. And then cut it in half. Set aside 1/2 for later. And divide the other half that you have right now into 4 pieces. These are going to be our pie bottoms or pie bases. In order to know how big you have to roll these out, you need some pie tins as a guideline. You're gonna need the pie tins anyway. This recipe yields 4 smaller pies exactly. You can get creative here and see what you have. As you can see in the shot, the pies are all sized differently anyway, so you have free range. You might just have to adjust the time of baking then a little bit. Roll out each one a little larger than the cake pan. So again, my pan is 10 centimeters, which means I created a circle that was about 15 centimeters or 6 inches in size. You really don't have to be super precise here. Just make sure that the dough covers the base and the sides are dragged up almost all the way. Any holes or spare spots, you can just close them by pinching the dough together with your fingers or adding some more additional dough. Any excess hanging off the sides, you can cut off with a knife to get like a clean cut, or just rip them if you want them to look more rustic. Now divide the filling between the 4 molds. Also, now's a good time to preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius. Last but not least, we need to seal our pies. So cut the remaining half of dough into 5 pieces this time. 5 because we need 4 lids and 1 piece of dough to make some more cute decorations out of. So roll the lids out until they're big enough to cover the pies. And the thickness is probably around 4 millimeters, I would say. You can connect the top and the sides by hand, like pinching them together, or you can go in with a fork, creating little crimping patterns. And then the final and 5th piece of dough I use to cut little leaves out of. Placing them on top here. And now finally, these can bake. These are super yum. I would recommend having them with a fresh salad on the side or some vegan gravy. On to the next scene.
I do everything my mama says.
You still wonder why you're so miserable.
Oh, I know how to find my happiness, Miss Bridgerton.
We have some young ladies of the ton hanging out, drinking lemonade together. So yeah, easy recipe. All you need is 1 to 2 lemons, some ice cubes, and some syrup. So yeah, super simple, just like they would do in Regency times. You add all the ingredients to a high-speed blender and blend them all up until you've got a slushy, crushed ice sort of consistency. I also added some lemon zest in there. This was a very, very juicy lemon, so if you can't get enough liquid out of one, then go for 2. In order to get the same look as in the show, divide the icy slush between 2 to 3 fancy looking glasses, and then top that off with some whole strawberries, perhaps some edible flowers if you happen to have some. I would actually, if I was ever serving this to people, I would just cut the berries up though. I love how in Bridgerton they assign specific colors or color palettes to the different characters and families. Like the Bridgertons are obviously blue, baby blue, with a bit of lilac and white. When I think of the Featheringtons, I think of green, but also orange and yellow and gold. And the Sharmas are definitely pink, but also purple. And so for my next recipe, I thought it'd be fun to create some color-coded cakes representing the different families. I made a simple lemon cake as my base here, since that is the only cake flavor I remember being mentioned in the second season. First off, I lined a baking sheet with parchment paper, wet parchment paper, and preheated my oven to 180 degrees Celsius. Then to a large mixing bowl, I added all my wet ingredients: non-dairy milk, vanilla, applesauce, vegetable oil, you can do melted vegan butter here as well, and the zest and the juice of this gorgeous, gorgeous lemon. Allow everything to curdle for about 5 minutes while you go ahead and combine all the dry ingredients in a separate bowl. And then, you know the drill, we're mixing together the wet and the dry. Pouring this into the prepared baking sheet, smoothing out the top a bit, and then letting this bake for around 25 minutes or until it's slightly golden brown at the top. And when you insert a knife or a fork or a toothpick, it comes out clean. Now there's of course many different ways of how one can color a cake. I could have gone the buttercream or powdered sugar glaze route, but since I wanted to go for more of a wedding tea cake sort of look, I tried to make my own fondant using a recipe that I found on YouTube as a guideline, while only having half the ingredients. In a small oven-proof bowl, I first placed all my wet ingredients. I let that all melt together in the oven for a couple minutes. It was still at 180 degrees Celsius. In the meantime, I sifted my powdered sugar into a large mixing bowl, created a little well, and then poured in the wet ingredients. I also had to add some sketchy sounding stabilizers, guar gum and locust bean gum. They're both all natural vegan, and I found these at the organic store. The outcome of this was okay. I was still able to roll this out carefully. However, I was missing that nice stretch that I assume I would have gotten from Tylose powder, which works as baking glue essentially, and I have no idea where to find that ingredient. Anyway, once I got my my white sugar dough ready, I colored parts of it green, pink, and light blue. Whenever the dough would start to dry out, I would just grease my hands with some vegan butter and slowly warm it up again. If you ever do happen to add too much liquid, then you can balance that out by adding some more stabilizer or powdered sugar. Decorating these was a journey for sure. But it was overall really fun. And the most fun was actually the last few finishing touches. Some berries, an orange slice that just didn't want to stay bent. Added some vegan sour cream here as my frosting. Against all odds, this turned out really pretty actually. I'm gonna be honest though that the cake tastes much better without the sugar coating. Because I wasn't able to roll out the fondant as thinly as I would have liked, it was just a lot of sugar all at once, and it was a lot. Now, I feel like this video wouldn't be complete without me trying to build one of these fancy afternoon tea stacks. They're in so many scenes, oftentimes stacked with fruits, cookies, biscuits, cakes, scones. These cookies are really good. They're not too sweet, super simple to make, and these might be my favorite sugar cookies that I've ever made on here. And they're filled with gooseberry jam, actually.
You must stay for dessert. It's gooseberry pie, Your Grace.
Ah, lovely.
We already have a pie recipe in this video, so I feel like it's okay for me to just go with gooseberry cookies instead. In a large mixing bowl, place some room temperature vegan butter, some vanilla, applesauce, and sugar. Using a hand mixer or a whisk plus muscle power, whip this up for a couple minutes until it's all light and creamy. And then you can add your flour and the salt. Mix that in as well until a cookie dough forms. Transfer that to your surface, and if you feel like it needs it, it's probably going to need it. Work in another half a tablespoon to 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. It depends on how moist your dough feels. Similar to when making the pies, the cornstarch just gives you a really nice, soft, not sticky consistency, and the reason why I like to add it in later is to really get a feel for the dough and to figure out, okay, how much dryness does this need right now, because cookie dough can sometimes be tricky, so the cornstarch can work as a really nice way of balancing that out. Wrap up the dough in some parchment paper and allow it to rest in the fridge for 30 minutes to an hour. If you make it a day in advance, that's cool too. Towards the end of the resting process, you can go ahead and preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius and then grab a baking tray and line that with parchment paper, which can very well be the one that you use to wrap the dough in. On a large cutting surface, roll out the dough as thinly as you can. For me, this was maybe like 3 millimeters to 4 millimeters of thickness. Yeah, then grab a cookie cutter. I didn't think I was ever gonna use this donut cookie cutout ever again, but it's perfect for this recipe. Half of the cookies that you're cutting out will need to have a little cutout for the jam to peek through later, so keep that in mind. Bake these for 10 to 12 minutes or until lightly golden brown along the edges. You'll probably have some more dough left over to use for a second batch. Once these have cooled down quite a bit, add a heaping teaspoon of gooseberry jam to the cookies that have no cutout, and then you just place 1 cookie with hole on top. Serve these with some tea or with some lemonade perhaps. That is it. I hope you had a fun time watching. I enjoyed myself a lot. This was what I needed. Let me know if you're trying any of today's recipes. They're all really good. Maybe try and do buttercream instead of my fondant. But besides that, I highly recommend. Yeah, thank you so much for being here and watching. I'll talk to you soon. Bye!